Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining tonight's discussion on Feminism for the 99%, the book reading. We have a special guest. We're very thankful to Tithi Bhattacharya for taking the time to went through some instructions from Kevin on how to access Spanish translation. We'll post that on the chat as well if people still need help with that, or reach out to one of the moderators in a private chat and we'd be able to help you. I'm going to go through some participation guidelines for how we're going to conduct discussion after TP's presentation. Yeah, so basically be respectful and polite in the chat. As the moderators will be monitoring the chat. If you have questions, please post them in the chat and we'll be curating, synthesizing them to present to TP to answer. Understand that we may not be able to get to your questions. There were questions that were pre-submitted by folks who registered for the event, so we're going to prioritize and go through those and the ones that came out of the reading group discussion as well. And be patient as there will be Spanish translation. And I know I just went through all this pretty fast. Hopefully Kevin's keeping up. Yeah, so we're going to try to, this is something new for us, so we're going to figure this out. And let's be mindful of Tithi's time as well. Again, we're very grateful for her to join us. She does have a hard stop at 8:30. So we'll hopefully conclude the meat of the discussion by then. And at the end of this, there'll be some time for the sponsors of this event to present on the work that they're doing as well. Can you actually go back to the previous slide, please, Victoria? Yeah, so I will be facilitating along with Emma, and Jason and Victoria are going to support moderating keeping an eye on the chat. But you can reach out to any one of us with any questions you may have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emma. So this reading group came out of the idea for doing a reading on feminism at 99% came out of the reading group within Central Connecticut DSA. And Emma was one of the prime motivators for why we should read this, and was going to do this presentation. And then we got lucky with Tithi actually joining us to do the presentation. So we want to let Emma take some time to motivate why we chose this book and also to introduce Tithi. Take it away, Emma.
Thank you so much. So hello everybody. My name is Emma Scott. I'm a member of Bridgeport DSA and steering committee representative for Central Connecticut DSA.
Emma, your stream is
acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Quinnipiac, Wappinger, and Paugussett nations. Let me try something.
You're good now, Emma. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Apparently my connection wasn't that great, but so
it was better with the video off.
From the top. Oh, it was? I can turn the video off then. Hello everyone. My name is Emma Scott. I'm a member of Bridgeport DSA and steering committee representative for Central Connecticut DSA. I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Quinnipiac, Wappinger, and Paugussett nations. Sovereignty was never ceded. I first read Feminism for the 99% about a year ago for an International Women's Strike event with members from Quiet Corner DSA. At the time, I was still coming to terms with my gender identity, my perception of my own position in the structure of society, and how my upbringing has shaped me into something that felt they had to deny their own authentic self to simply exist within the structure. So F99, Feminism from the 99%, really laid bare these thoughts for me, seeing the way society promoted and propagated ideas concerning what trans and cis women are, what they should be, and simple truth that socioeconomic systems can take on a life of their own and command us to protect the very machinery that harms and degrades us materially and spiritually. So liberal feminism has for far too long been held up on a pedestal as the only practical means of improving the lives of women within the framework of neoliberal capitalism. However, feminism for the 99% demonstrates that any movement acting within that framework is doomed to failure as it does not address the inherent oppression of the framework itself. My whole life, the mainstream ideology that has been taught to me is that having a handful of people from marginalized groups represented in institutions of power was the de facto aim of empowering these groups. But this is nothing more than a carefully fabricated myth that fails to understand or address the reality of the vast majority of marginalized people. So without a socialist intersectional perspective society, we fail to see the tapestry of oppression woven into our everyday lives. We fail to see that female politicians promoting austerity are vessels of capital and immiseration, not representatives working on the behalf of poor women. We fail to see that liberal identity politics does not challenge the structures that hold people in conditions of exploitation and misery, but in fact act as a means of suppressing solidarity between groups that should be working together hand in hand, and furthermore lull us into a false sense of security. Now we face the existential threat of a once-in-a-century plague, climate change, and total economic collapse. Never before has there been a need to speak the truth unabashedly about the need for intersectional socialist radical feminism as a means of building a new culture of unity and equality. So it is with great honor and admiration that I introduce our speaker tonight, Tithi Bhattacharya. She is an associate professor of South Asian history at Purdue University, organizer for the 2017 International Women's Strike, an advocate for BDS and Palestinian rights, and a co-author of Feminism for the 99%.
Go ahead, Tithi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. You can't probably, because of the video, probably see my eyes, comrades, but I'm tearing up. That was such a powerful introduction to the manifesto, and it's going to be hard to follow upon that. So I want to back up a bit and start with thanking Central Connecticut DSA for inviting me to do this. I completely disagree that it's your honor. It's completely my honor to be with such fantastic activists. And I am so grateful to be able to share my thoughts and to learn from you today. I also particularly want to thank Kevin as translator. I know how hard simultaneous translation is, and translation in general is, so thank you very much. Naveen and the whole team you put together, I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you and learn from you today. So we are in the middle of a pandemic, and it seems that all our previous notions of what reality is disappearing fast. And so I think this is a good moment for us to pause and look at the world as capitalism gave us and see the pandemic as a moment, a pause in the normal business of things. And I mean business in a very intentional way, and to see what was wrong with it and how to move forward. So I want to start with something very simple, which is something that most people, I'm sure, in the audience is familiar with. I certainly am as a parent, which is Girl Scout cookies. So I'm from the global South. I'm from India. So when I first came to the US, I first encountered Girl Scout cookies, and they were delicious. But then I looked at the sort of blurb at the back of the boxes, and I'm just going to read out one of the blurbs that that one of the boxes had. It was so striking that I actually saved it. Through Girl Scouts, girls learn to think like entrepreneurs as they participate in activities that spark curiosity, confidence, and innovation. Research shows that girls are actively interested in becoming entrepreneurs, developing financially stable futures, and using their skills to make a big impact on the world. This was astonishing to me, that for all this time that I had been, a girl and have been parenting a girl, I never knew that they had this hidden active interest of becoming entrepreneurs, and that human attributes that are most active in children, which is curiosity, confidence, innovation, those were actually attributes that ought to have been harnessed for this one project, which was being successful as an entrepreneur. So this was an astonishing discovery in a way with the Girl Scout cookies box, but it outlines for us today the project of neoliberal feminism, or the feminism of the 1%, which had come to define feminism, if you like, for the last 40 years of neoliberalism, which was feminism was a project to succeed within capitalism. This was a feminism of the professional managerial class, of the middle or upper middle class women in the global north, mostly white, who are climbing corporate ladders in business, politics, and the military. Okay, so this was considered the feminism that we all had to aspire to. So, which is, popular culture was rife in the, if you remember at all, in the 80s and 90s, popular culture was rife with this definition of feminism, that this view of feminism. But as we all know, the vast majority of women on the planet are neither white nor upper middle class. They're poor and working class. They're migrants, they're women of color, and they're trans. So for decades of neoliberalism, feminism was equated with success. Okay, so you can be anything, said the feminist means, and by anything, no one meant a teacher or a nurse or a street cleaner. By anything, people meant the president of the United States. So girls can become president was all the hype about it. This is not to say that other feminisms had completely disappeared during the period of neoliberalism. Other feminisms existed, but they had been driven underground. So we had very powerful Black feminist voices. We had very powerful feminist voices from the global South. We had trans feminism, Stone Butch Blues. I mean, God, this was, a classic that when I first when I first read it, absolutely altered my worldview. So, I mean, these kind of feminisms and gender challenges is how I like to think of them, existed throughout the period of neoliberalism, but this dominant feminism of the 1%, the feminism of the Hillary Clinton, the Madeleine Albright, that was absolutely relentless and proud to kill Iraqi children, became the dominant representation of feminism. So what happened towards the end of the 1990s, and I want to say sort of the beginning of the 2000s, which propelled the rise of a new kind of feminism. And in certain cases, this new feminism, as I'm calling it, managed to archive and excavate the existing sort of subterranean trends of feminism and articulate it powerfully into social movements. So what are the two? I want to draw attention to two main things that propel the rise of a new feminism. And this is what we talk about in our book in, sort of more sort of detailed and organized way. So one catalyst for this new feminism is neoliberalism itself. Neoliberalism waged, as you and I both know, a fierce assault in what we call the sphere of social reproduction. And this is something that I've been studying for decades now. All the activities and programs that support people and life making, right? From birth to raising children, elder care, the domestic labor within families, Two, sort of outside of the family, institutions such as public education, healthcare, transportation, retirement income, public housing, all of this were absolutely ravaged by neoliberalism. So all the institutions that supported people making or life making, institutions of social reproduction, were actually ravaged. But you know, one of the things that some people on the left argued, especially in the 1990s, I remember this so well, was that we are looking at, with neoliberalism, we're looking at a sort of exit of the state and the dominance of the market, right? So the state was retreating. There was no state actors anymore. The state was retreating and markets were dominant. Now, those of us from the global south and those of us who are people of color in the north and gender non-binary people know that the state was as strong as ever in the neoliberal period. In fact, stronger than ever before. So the carceral functions of the state were actually expanded and hardened during the neoliberal period, right? So anyone who has had to cross international borders, anyone who's felt the police presence in their neighborhoods, anyone who has known sort of to apply for welfare and be denied on absolutely spurious and racist grounds and sexist grounds, know that the state remains extremely powerful. But what had happened was all social reproduction functions of the state had been eviscerated while the carceral functions of the state had been escalated, right? And there is a logical connection to this process. So think of a Black or brown neighborhood in the United States, right? The south side of Chicago, which is the place that I am most familiar with. If you close down public schools, as the various mayors did in the south side of Chicago, if you close down public schools, if you deny people their right to educate children and live a flourishing life, then people are going to be upset. And if people are upset, you need more cops in the neighborhood to contain that upset, as we are seeing right now in Minnesota. So in other words, the lack of or the cutting of social reproduction functions and the rise or escalation and hardening of carceral functions go hand in hand, right? So this is not a surprise then when we think about this kind of landscape of denuded social reproduction and escalated carceral functions of the 90s and 2000s of neoliberalism. It is not a surprise that when the round of protests would start, they would be over life-making resources, right? Over water, over schools, over food, over electricity. So these would be the new round of protests that we would see flare and explode across the globe towards the sort of early 2000s and the end of the 1990s. So you had those fantastic water protests in Cochabamba, Bolivia, the water protests in Ireland. You had the round of strikes of teachers and nurses. So, and of course, for housing, rent-free places. So all of these strikes you will see were A, in the social reproduction sector, and B, were mostly women-led. So this is very different in a way, just to sort of put it in historical context. This was very different from the crisis of the 1930s, of the last Great Depression, in the US and in the planet, when the focus of the protests was the workplace and industrial organizing, right? So this protest, the round of protests that we were seeing throughout the 2000s were not necessarily in the workplace, absolutely did spread to the workplace ultimately, but did not necessarily begin in the workplace, right? So the second point then to say about the origin of the protests is a convergence of feminist protests and anti-systemic protests. And why is this? Because these were protests in the social reproduction arena, which still the vast majority of social reproduction work is done by women, care work is done by women. So since these protests originated in this arena, they very quickly took the form of anti-systemic protests. So there was a convergence then between protecting life-making activities and protesting capitalism, right? So it was not a surprise that these feminist protests for better healthcare, for indigenous rights, for water and clean air soon turned into actually a critique of the system as a whole. So this is the sort of origin, if you like, of the feminist strikes of 2017 that I had the privilege of being one of the organizers for in 2017. So it was a, we started with the, the model, the inspiration of the fantastic popular movement in Poland by feminists and women against their absolutely draconian anti-reproduction justice, anti-contraception, and anti-abortion laws. So Polish women went on a mass demonstration and strike against their anti-abortion laws. And the second was the anti-gender violence protests in Latin America. So those two were sort of the inspiration for the 2017, the first feminist strike, the International Women's Strike. And I think the International Women's, I mean, I remember the sort of early organizing of it. We started talking about this on various, sort of chat groups and etc. in the fall of 2017, and then bam, for us in the United States in the fall of 2016, and in the United States in November 2016, there was this earthquake of Trump being elected. And so 2017 saw a beginning of almost a new era of right-wing populism shading into fascism in the United States that I, having lived here for nearly 20 years, have never seen before. And so when the Women's March happened in January of 2017, it was a fantastic response. It was one of the largest social movements in the social demonstrations, popular demonstrations in the United States ever. And it was led by women. And, I want to acknowledge and give a shout out to our comrade Angela Davis, who got on the podium and speaking to millions of people as being broadcast over social media and national television, giving a shout out to Palestine. So it was a fantastic thing to see. I don't think this has ever been seen in a popular demonstration before. Someone, like Angela Davis getting up there and saying, Viva Palestine. So it was a fantastic march. However, there was something about the Women's March that was lacking, which was it lacked a certain kind of anti-capitalist politics. In fact, it was very clear not to, broadcast any kind of anti-capitalist agenda. So some of us in the United States felt that it was a missed opportunity. You know, we had millions of people marching across the country against who was going to be clearly the spokesperson of naked capitalism. And we were not mentioning the C word, which was responsible for all our woes. We were also particularly not impressed with the lineup of speakers. You know, it was the usual sort of celebrities. You know, Scarlett Johansson is not my favorite person because she's pretty anti-Palestine. And I didn't see a single sex worker on the podium. I didn't see a single trans comrade. So it was like, this is not the most representative of our movement, you know, or of this of the social demographic of the left. And remember, this was before you know, our AOC and Ilhan Omar's and things like that. But there was no acknowledgement that there was a diverse group of people existing on this land who had been working against settler colonialism, had been working against systemic racism, and so on. So we decided in 2017 to actually have a women's strike for March 8th. And we wanted to talk about and embody a class-based feminism, which was capable of articulating demands and political positions that spoke to the complexity of the lived experience of cis and trans women and working class women left behind by corporate and lean-in feminism, okay? So us using the term strike was very significant in that way because we wanted to emphasize A, the radical tradition of feminism, and B, we wanted to talk about a feminist strike as opposed to a normal strike. A feminist strike is a strike both in the arena of production and in the arena of social reproduction. It was a day when we said that not only will we not go to work, we will also not smile, not offer you sex, not do your childcare, not do your dishes, you know, fuck all that. So this was basically the essence, if you like, of the feminist strike. One of the things that we need to remember is that in 2017, you know, when women in 50 countries participated in the strike movement of March 8th, it actually re-legitimized the strike. Okay, so we have to remember that this was before, you know, the era of sort of the strike, the teacher strike wave, the era of the nurses strike wave in the United States. So the March 8th strike of 2017 was a fantastic blow to the neoliberal consensus that women or working class people could not strike because, you know, we were too afraid, too cowed, whatever. We have to remember that the first group of people who actually struck in their workplace on March 8, 2017 were teachers. 3 school districts, all 3 of them in Republican strongholds, with anti-strike laws, right? Called in sick, teachers called in sick and closed down school districts in 2017. So when in 2018, there is a new strike wave across the United States, is it any surprise that it is in the social reproduction sector and it is led by teachers? So in the manifesto, I think what we tried to do, and you can tell us what you thought of it, what we tried to do in the manifesto is kind of do two things. One is draw a clear boundary between liberal feminism, or feminism of the 1%, the lean-in feminism of Sheryl Sandberg, and the working class struggle feminism, or feminism of the 99%. Feminism that is rooted in the power of the working class, and which is about a liberatory project for all, not just for women, right? So now, I mean, I want to end, I guess, with COVID-19. In the midst of a pandemic that is killing thousands, I guess I want to talk about, in conclusion, about a killer that is far more dangerous, in my opinion, than COVID-19, and what that has to do with the sort of feminist project. And this dangerous killer we can actually thank for bringing us to this crisis, and that is capitalism. We now know that the factory farming was part of the reason for the origins of this virus. We also know how the system has responded to this virus, which is prioritizing what it has always prioritized, profits over life. So today, to end, I want to talk about what we kind of touch upon in the manifesto, but we did not elaborate it to its fullest extent, but now we have a chance to, which is the fate of life and life-making under COVID-19. So, you know, to set down certain sort of riders first, that while capitalism as a system only cares about profit being the system's lifeblood and motor, the system actually has what I call a relation of reluctant dependence on processes and institutions of life-making. Now, what do I mean by that? The system is dependent on workers to produce commodities, which are then sold to make profits. So the system thus can only survive if workers' lives are reproduced continuously and reliably while being replaced generationally. So again, to go back to the manifesto, food, housing, public transport, public schools, hospitals are all ingredients of life-making that socially reproduce workers and their families. And the level of access to them often determines the fate of the class as a whole. And of course, as we all know, women still perform the bulk of life-making work globally. So that's the dependent part, right? It needs workers. But capital is reluctant to spend any portion of its profits on processes that sustain and maintain life. This is why all care work is devalued, unpaid, or undervalued under capitalism, while institutions of life-making, such as schools and hospitals, are either constantly privatized or underfunded. So feminists do not need reminding how our world before COVID was already a ravaged world when it came to gender. Care work in the home was mostly performed by women. Women's unpaid labor in the home was worth $10 trillion globally. Professions which embody the spirit of care work, such as teaching, nursing, home care, of course, have a large number of women. If capitalism as a system is about the production of dead things or commodities, these services and infrastructures such as schools, hospitals, public transport are vital to the production of people or life. They do not just reproduce lives, let me be clear, but actually build capacities and attributes essential to the human condition as a whole. So into this world of unequal wages, unremunerated labor, and unmitigated gender violence came the COVID-19 virus. One would think that since this was a public health crisis, our rulers would finally pay attention to, oh, I don't know, public health. And to a certain extent, they actually did. New temporary field hospitals were created to care for the sick. Normally, draconian immigration laws were temporarily relaxed, while posh hotels were commandeered to house the homeless. So then the question turns, did capitalism suddenly under COVID-19 turn caring? And the answer, of course, is a resounding no. Around the world, governments only started to respond to the virus once its spread was already impossible to control by their respective medical infrastructures. It has actually been instructive for some of us to see how stubbornly capitalism refused to protect life while panicking over and protecting stocks. By the way, the United States leads the world, as you know, in prioritizing death-making over life-making. In addition to leading the world in militarism, it is a society with 2.7 hospital beds per 1,000 people and 120 guns per 100 civilians. What the pandemic then has done is tragically revealed what we feminists knew all along, that the life-making work of care performed mostly by women, such as food production, nursing, cleaning, teaching, is actually what sustains society. This is why capitalism had to admit during this crisis of public health that nurses and farm workers, not stockbrokers and CEOs, were, quote unquote, essential workers. In other words, the work of women and gender nonconformist people actually makes all work possible. So you think finally women would be rewarded for getting society through the pandemic, right? Well, in the United States, women represent 60% of those laid off in the pandemic. Nurses all over the world have had to work without PPE or personal protective equipment. In the heart of empire, one of the richest nations of the world, nurses, mostly women, have had to go into work with wearing garbage bags and swim goggles because they were not given PPE. In Italy, immigrant women are now being airlifted to work on Italian firms with no regard for social distancing rules. Meanwhile, domestic violence is on the rise everywhere due to women being forced to stay home with known abusive partners and family members. And through this, instead of opening up more hospitals, more childcare centers for essential workers, more resources to provide food to starving millions, what are the governments keen to open up? The economy. This is how we know that for capitalism, the priority is still thing-making and not life-making. Indeed, it is now actively endangering life. This is why once the pandemic crisis passes, we cannot go back to business as usual. We must demand that instead of capitalism putting our lives in crisis, we put its dynamic of profit-making over life-making into crisis. That life and life-making become the basis of social organization to the flourishing of the many rather than the prosperity of the few. This is a moment that we have a chance to chart a different path, to build a truly anti-systemic movement for the 99%, where the health of the planet is equated with the health of all the species who live on the planet, and not for the sake of the health of CEOs and their profits. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. So we have some pre-selected questions to go through, and then if we have enough time, we can we'll have some questions from the chat. So a lot of these you've already sort of covered. So starting off, questions regarding theory. Is it good that women now have more access to professional managerial jobs than previously? And can women's liberation be achieved within the framework of the capitalist system?
Shall I just answer or wait for a few more?
Oh, no, that was the question.
Okay, great. So let me give a very short response to the second part of the question, which is, can women's liberation be achieved within the framework of the capitalist system? There is just a very short answer, and that's no. And the reason why the answer is no goes back to the first part of the question, which is, well, is it good that women now have more access to professional and managerial jobs than previously? Yes and no, in the sense that, the COVID-19 crisis is a very important, is a good example, I think, to talk about that. So there was an article in the New York Times, I don't know, sometime last week, which was that the countries which were led by women, and I think they had New Zealand by Jacinda and Angela Merkel in Germany, and they had somebody else, I can't remember. Anyway, so they said that these countries had done much better at dealing with the crisis than countries led by men. Okay, so there is some truth to that. There is when I see, for instance, the New Zealand premier actually do Facebook Lives while she's dealing, Jacinda Ardern do Facebook Live while she's dealing with her children and changing diapers. I think, good, this should be a model, absolutely. Why should we have to model ourselves after, ridiculously end-tied, end-suited, Boris Johnson and Trump. We should be in our sweatpants, dealing with our kids, and also talking about policies. So in that sense, it's great, that there is some truth to it, that the women, because of their experience of gender, have done fairly well in thinking about how to protect life, because it is a crisis of life and life making, the COVID-19 crisis. But on the other hand, let's look at it, from a socialist perspective, right? Is it good that a woman leads a capitalist state? Okay. Maybe it's great during this particular crisis that they are prioritizing life, but in the last instance, the priorities of the capitalist state is to maintain capitalist accumulation, right? So neither Jacinda Ardern nor Angela Merkel, and Angela Merkel is obviously more conservative than Jacinda Ardern, but none of them would be willing to actually forgo the preeminence of their own states, so the preeminence of the German state or the interests of the New Zealand state in the world market. Okay, so that is, so in the last instance, do I really want drone bombs protecting the national interests by a woman, or drone bombs protecting national interests by a man? So this was my, position during the Obama era, which was, I'm not sure if this was a great thing for people who lost their families in the drone program, that they were being bombed by the first Black president, or if they were being bombed in the subsequent era by the first woman presidents, which would be Hillary Clinton. So I think the problem here, comrades, is the very mechanism of capitalist accumulation. So whether a woman is in command of that process of capital accumulation or a man, is in the last instance really irrelevant to the lives and welfare of the many on this planet. So I don't think we want any form of emancipation, women's or human. We expect any form of emancipation, either of women or of humanity as a whole, while this system of profit making is in place.
Thank you so much. We just have quite a few to go through. Next question. Addressing the conditions of women in what we call first world countries versus exploited nations. How are their conditions connected? And can their struggles be connected? And if so, on what basis can solidarity be built across national lines?
Right. Okay. So this is a very important question, especially for someone like me who grew up in the global South. So first of all, I think what we need to understand is that internationalism is our weapon, right? So we absolutely cannot go through this crisis, or we cannot have an anti-systemic framework to the crisis of capitalism if we limit it within national borders, right? National borders, besides actually literally killing people, migrants trying to cross these borders, besides killing people, are actually preeminent in bordering the internationalist impulses of working classes, right? So national borders incite workers to identify with their own ruling class while seeing workers from other nations as competitors, right? So in this country, the history of the labor movement is not particularly glorious when it comes to internationalism. We've had union leaders talk about, protecting the native working class against the yellow menace or the yellow peril, which is Chinese workers. We've had people say, well, if Trump is going to build, union leaders say that if Trump is going to build a wall, it better be built by union labor. This is disastrous for the working class emancipation. So absolutely, internationalism has to be the basis of any kind of movement built. But why? Is this like a moral idea that we should be generous towards people in the global South? Then, oh, they're so poor, let's be nice to them. No, actually, it is in our interest to have this international solidarity. Let's look at any kind of commodity production under capitalism, right? Any kind of commodity production under capitalism follows international veins of capitalist accumulation, okay? Things mined in African nations are put together in Chinese factories where workers try to commit suicide, and Foxconn has to put nets under the windows to prevent workers from committing suicide. Conditions are so fiercely exploitative. Minerals mined in Africa or Chile are then put together in Foxconn factories in China, and then sort of accumulated by a fantastic company in Silicon Valley, California, and then sold on the global market called iPhones, right? So all of these veins of exploitative labors have to be followed in order to build that one commodity, the iPhone, that you can buy now at any AT&T store or Target, right? The labor and sweat of workers from all over the globe go into the making of the world, of that iPhone. So we cannot say that when we talk about the fight of workers in Foxconn factories in China, or the fight of Silicon Valley workers in California, we cannot say these fights are separate and one should be privileged over the other. We have to say that these fights have a common interest, along with the fight with workers in Chile and in African nations. These have a common interest because they all together contribute the exploitation, the blood and sweat of the workers all over contribute to the building of that one commodity, the iPhone. And so all those struggles, all those narratives, all those stories of working class lives are connected and must be in solidarity with each other if we're going to protest the conditions in one. So, you know, now more than ever, I would say that the slogan that the IWW had many, many years ago, that an injury to one is an injury to all, is more relevant than ever. Because if we give in to the national borders argument that American jobs for American workers or whatever the hell that nonsense is, then we are actually defeating the purpose of working class emancipation.
Thank you so much. We just have a lot of questions and not much time left. So is it possible that you could maybe keep the answers to about like 2 minutes?
I'm going to try.
I could listen to you all day, but if we just don't have a lot of time.
Can I just say yes and no?
So how can, let's see, this social reproduction theory only apply to capitalism?
Did we skip a slide? Sorry, I thought there was other questions for this, the COVID stuff. And then when it comes to COVID, I think maybe we can just summarize all of that into a single question. I'll try to do that while you're going through the other ones.
Sure. Does social reproduction theory only apply to capitalism or earlier forms of class society as well? If it doesn't apply to earlier forms of class rule, what is the basis for women's oppression in other class societies? What about Cuba or other socialist countries? Is women's oppression lessened in countries with strong social democratic systems like universal child care?
And you want me to answer that in 2 minutes? Okay. So social reproduction theory does apply only to capitalism because only under capitalism has the labor of socially reproducing people been completely separated from the production of commodities, right? In fact, there is no commodity production in the capitalist sense in pre-capitalist societies. So that's the very, very short answer to that. What is the basis of women's oppression in other class societies? Well, the family, the patriarchal family is definitely the basis of women's oppression in other class societies. But, you know, I don't have time to go into it. Cuba, I do not consider Cuba as a socialist country, as I do not consider either post-Lenin Russia or China at all. So I personally do not consider these socialist countries. I consider them state capitalist countries in the sense that accumulation and exploitation and the production of surplus value happens in these countries, but they do not happen through private enterprises like they happen in the United States, but they happen through the capitalist, through the state capitalist state. So the government or the state is actually the one employer, if you like to think of it in that way. This is a very interesting question of women's oppression lessened in countries with strong democratic systems. One would like to think yes, right? But if you look, I taught this course in France last year, and I had several students in my class from Nordic countries, and discussions with them, you know, it made me go and research. if you look into the statistics for domestic violence in Nordic countries, you will find that astonishingly high. Yes, they have universal childcare. Yes, women have very high or higher wages than the rest of the capitalist countries and so on. But you'll find sexual violence, domestic violence is rampant in these countries. Think about the popular Nordic noir genre. It's all about sexual and domestic violence. Stig Larsson, the girl with the dragon tattoo. I mean, these are countries of so-called touted, great social democratic miracles. And look at, how women are treated. So the dynamics of capitalist accumulation, as long as they are prevalent, will continuously produce the dynamics of women's oppression and sexual and gender normativity, right? So yes, certain of the violent tendencies may be mitigated through universal childcare and higher wages, but they certainly do not disappear.
Thank you. So how does social reproduction theory, which seems to accept immutable biological differences between men and women in terms of reproduction and sexualized labor, explain oppression of trans women and queer people?
Well, first of all, social reproduction theory does not accept immutable biological differences. Social reproduction theory, as well as feminism for the 99%, talk about women in both cis, trans, and also gender non-binary terms. Let's think about the basis of social reproduction theory. Social reproduction theory simply argues this, that the reproduction of workers in the private sphere of the bourgeois family is essential to the maintenance of the system as a whole, right? How that private sphere of bourgeois family is organized is not in a way, dictated by social reproduction theory. It's not saying that the bourgeois family is always heteronormative, although social reproduction theory does claim that bourgeois heteronormativity is actually the easiest and the most profitable way for capitalism to organize social reproduction, okay? So bourgeois heteronormativity is always pronounced in all capitalist social relations. However, capitalism ultimately is, in a way, okay with human beings being reproduced within the privatized reproduction sphere, as long as they are in any kind of other familial settings. Then what creates bourgeois heteronormativity? First of all, it is the most violent. Bourgeois heteronormativity is the most violent and the most historically convenient way for capitalism to socially organize social reproduction, right? So this is why our trans comrades and all queer comrades across the board have had to struggle in a way, not just for acknowledgement, but actually to even participate in production. So I want to give you an example of Pakistan, okay? The country that my country is constantly in war with. So Pakistan, I want to say 5 years ago, actually made a law that they were going to acknowledge trans people on their passports, right? So you didn't have to say you were male or female. You could choose whatever gender you wanted. And there was no, like in the UK, you have to go through this Gender Recognition Act in order to do all this rigmarole. Pakistan said, nothing. You can just change your passport and do that. And I was like, wow, this is fantastic. This is great. But then the capitalist state giveth with one hand and taketh with the other. So on the other hand, Pakistan also said that trans people would be granted, government positions, okay, through this process of social acknowledgement, okay? And what government jobs were reserved for trans people? Oh, wow, tax collection, which means that when the taxman or tax person came to your door, that would be a trans person. So in other words, it was a very calculated way to actually increase hostility to trans people. So then, of course, after this, grand generosity was granted by the state, escalation of trans violence continued to happen. And people were like, wow, we were so generous to trans people. And look, people are just being mean to them. But you understand that the logic of capitalist state is for the preservation of the heteronormative family because it's the most convenient and historically stable, quote unquote, of the social organizations to reproduce life and workers.
Thank you so much. We have 2 questions on COVID. I'm wondering if we can, merge them together.
Yeah, so I think if we can just, maybe merge them together. I think, Tithi, if you can speak more about how the COVID situation crisis is sort of proving out social reproductive theory in some ways, and both in terms of women being essential workers, but also having to care for children at home and responsible for social reproduction. And it's also highlighted all sorts of anti-women structures in society and the rise of abuse in the domestic sphere. So if you could speak to how COVID has maybe transformed your understanding or revised your understanding or added to the understanding of social reproductive theory. And also, I think the second question is gets to what do we do now? Like, how do we fight effectively within the situation we find ourselves in? Are there any updates you would make to the manifesto in terms of what the tasks are for us in the next 12 to 8 months, given the situation with COVID and what's happening with the reopening and all the struggles that are growing around that?
Right. Well, that's a lot. So
you get 5 minutes for this one.
Okay. So I guess I want to start with, what COVID-19 has done to women and gender non-conforming people. And just to give a very small example, I'm one of the privileged sort of workers who can stay at home and do my work, as a professor. But the reason I have to get off this call at 8:30 is because I'm a single mom and I have to take care of my kid by 8:30. And so I was very moved. Well, I've been very moved by the various testimonies from women within the household and how they've been trying to manage their lives and their working lives through this pandemic. Okay, so I want to start with a Chinese couple and a man and a woman, both of them doctors. They were quoted in the New York Times recently. They both worked, round the clock during the pandemic, right? So they were in China, in Beijing, and the epidemic was surging. They were working round the clock. But when they left the house in the morning, it was the woman who prepared food for the entire day for their 11-year-old who they left back home, right? So they were both doctors in the exact same field, but the woman prepared all the food. Similarly, the New York Times presented, the stories of women trying to work from their home. Okay, so one woman had to set up her office in the bathroom. because she said that's the only room I can bloody lock the door to. Okay, women were working, and I'm sure some of you on the chat know this, working from their cars. Okay, because that's the sort of cocoon of isolation and solitude that that women could get. And women always get this question. For those women in heteronormative relationships, they always get this question from their male partners, which is, are you done yet? As though childcare and housework is, in a way, my work and not theirs, and they're doing it as a great favor to the common good, right? So it's always considered kind of my work, and they're just helping out. So this has been escalated, obviously, in the pandemic, because all of us, the vast majority of us have had to work from home. On the other side, essential workers who've actually had to go to work, most governments and social orders have not provided them with adequate childcare or adequate elder care as they go into work, let alone PPE and other structures of, sort of protection for these essential workers. On this note, I think I want to strike a slight note of, reflection on this category of essential workers, right? So this is a term that capitalism has devised, that some workers are essential workers. And actually, I'm really glad that CEOs and stockbrokers did not make the list of essential workers. So in a way, it revealed the veins of the real veins of society that pumps the blood of essential work, right? So nurses, teachers, street cleaners are our essential workers. But because we live under capitalism, and I'm always wary of terms that this system produces, I'm also I'm grateful that the essential work of social reproduction is being recognized, but I'm also wary. And I'm wary in the sense that while these comrades who are doing essential work are being recognized as essential workers, what about the work of comrades who are being dubbed as non-essential, right? So is that really non-essential to society? What about poets? I'm not a poet, but I want poets in my society. I want them to write poetry and nothing else, right? Because we want to fight for bread and roses. And so I just want to think about a society that says only, medical work or nursing is essential, and let's all sack all the poets. Well, that is a hell society that I don't want to live in, okay? Because I want to live in a society with poetry. So I think with this essential work category, while we should welcome it, we should also turn it and reflect on it a little bit, because it's coming from above. Instead, we should devise maybe our own essential worker from below category, right? Which is, first of all, if you are calling certain people essential workers, pay the hell them. Okay, give them pandemic pay. So that's the first thing we need to say. If they're essential, treat them as essential. Make the elite reflect, make the pay of the elite reflect their non-essentialness. Why should Jeff Bezos and Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, have made billions out of this crisis while nurses are struggling and having to die for the lack of PPE, right? So if they're essential, then make their pay essential to the functioning of society. Secondly, we don't agree that you get to decide who amongst the working class is essential and non-essential. We will have our own sense of the essential, which is about the flourishing of the many. So those are some of my, I guess, thoughts when I think about the pandemic and how to sort of re-emerge out of this crisis with a new framework for reimagining society.
Thank you so much. Just to get into the next question. So in your talk at last year's Subversive Festival, you talked about the potential for a Green New Deal to incite movements rather than contain them. So in what ways is the current discourse about GND containing movements, and in what ways have movements been incited? How can movements for GND better work to incorporate feminist struggles and build a class feeling that Luxemburg spoke of?
Okay. So what I mean by incite movements rather than contain them, I'll just speak to that very briefly, which is a Green New Deal is essential. We must have it, but it cannot be achieved within the corridors of power, not through the Congress and not through the Senate, okay? So these are not the venues, in my mind, where we can push through a Green New Deal. A Green New Deal can only be pushed through movements on the streets. So this is why the concept of the Green New Deal should not be seen as a policy concept. It should be seen as a social movement concept, okay? So Green New Deal, the discussion around Green New Deal is often a discussion of policy. How do we implement it? Where does the money come from? But to be honest with you, the real thing about the Green New Deal is none of that is going to be passed in Congress or the Senate. You capitalist politicians, it doesn't matter what AOC says or Ilhan Omar says. They are a minority voice. It is not going to be passed by a capitalist Senate or even a Congress, right? What we need is a militant movement on the streets that forces the politicians to actually work. And those politicians who are sympathetic to the new Green New Deal, like AOC, it will give them confidence to push it further, right? So this is the first thing that we need to say, that discussions of the Green New Deal need to leave the boardroom, need to leave the corridors of power and be ingrained and instantiated in the movement of working class people on the street. So we cannot talk about, you know, the labor movement as a movement just for wages. Like, this is an irrelevant question in this day and age if we limit the vision of the labor movement to wage raises and benefits alone. The labor movement needs to talk about the ecological devastation, needs to talk about police violence, needs to talk about virulent sexism in this society. Otherwise, we are not going to get anywhere. So what I mean by that is the discussion of Green New Deal needs to be a discussion within the labor movement rather than in corridors of power within the Congress.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next question from IWS. So new work on social reproduction theory has burst into popular consciousness in conjunction with the explosion of women's mobilization in the global South and Southern Europe, which you talked about already. So what is the relationship between the enrichment of this theory and the new movement in the streets? What does this mean for our tasks as socialists and as feminists?
I think I kind of talked about this before, I suppose. So all I'll say here is that I think our tasks as socialist feminists is very simple. One is, in our organizations that we belong to that talk about class struggle, which is devoid of race and gender, we need to talk about race and gender, okay? And in our organizations that talk about, you know, race or gender separated from class struggle, separated from the wage struggle, we need to bring in questions of the wage. That's our job as I see it, as revolutionary feminists and revolutionary socialist feminists.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So how do art, self-care, family care, and community care figure within our struggle for power against oppression?
Well, this is a great question because I think some of this, the answer to it has been provided by ordinary people during this pandemic, right? So when I think about this pandemic, two images come to my mind. One is ordinary people's response to the pandemic, which was Italians singing to each other across their balconies. And the other is the capitalist state's response to the pandemic, which is the Indian police hosing down migrants with bleach on the streets of India, right? So those two, I think, clarify for us which, you know, what society is capable of in terms of a crisis, which is love and solidarity towards other human beings, and what capitalism forces upon us through alienated social relations, which is competitive behavior towards our fellow human beings. You know, I always give this example in class. You know, when I talk about the origins of capitalism, I say, okay, look around you, ladies and gentlemen. Are you feeling any particular hostility towards your classmates? And they say, no, you know, they're just, it's an ordinary morning, whatever. And then I say, okay, now imagine that this class is actually a waiting room for a job interview, and only one of you is going to get the job. Now, how do you feel towards the rest of you in this class? And they say, I want them dead. I feel hostile towards them. So in other words, the pandemic is revealing what humanity is capable of, which is solidarity. Palestinian farmers are leaving food, free produce on the sides of the street for hungry folks, while, you know, Viktor Orban has become dictator of Hungary. So both of these responses and impulses are apparent during the pandemic crisis. Ordinary human beings are responding with solidarity, which should be the basis of a future society, and the capitalist state is responding with carceral discipline in order to manage the crisis and go back to business as usual.
Thank you. We've got 3 more questions. Don't know if we have time for all. Oh, I'm sorry, 4.
Yeah.
All 4.
So I think in the interest of time, maybe Emma, we can. I think maybe the first one around the Me Too movement and Joe Biden and the elections. I'd love to hear Tithi's thoughts on that. And then I think the next 3 are sort of, you know, how do we build an independent socialist radical left that can effectively promote the feminism for 99%? I think that'd be a great way to end the discussion.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh dear, Joe Biden, where to start? Okay, so this is where I think the statement by the Socialist Feminist Caucus of the DSA is fantastic. And even though I'm not a member, I would love to endorse it and support it. It's really, really great. I think one of the things that has to be said about the whole question is the Me Too movement was not about, you know, liberal media in their absolute desperation to back Joe Biden over everybody else, particularly Bernie Sanders, right? Can you imagine what would happen? I'm just digressing for a minute, but can you imagine what would happen if there was an allegation of sexual assault against Bernie? Oh my God, that, you know, it's unimaginable, right? But Joe Biden, everyone is turning pretzels, their logic, in order to back Joe Biden and all of this. So I want to say this, that the project of the Me Too movement was not as simplistic as liberal media is now saying that we were part of. The liberal media wants to say that we in the Me Too movement basically said, believe all women. No, Me Too was not about that. What Me Too was about was that all women who had an allegation of sexual assault had the right to have the accuser, the accused, the man who they were accusing, had the right for the man to be investigated. That's all that Me Too was about, okay? So investigate the man who we are accusing of sexual harassment or violence, okay? That was what the Me Too movement was about. It wasn't this, simplistic, childish claim, believe all women, which now the liberal media is saying is rubbish. Well, no, Me Too movement was about, if there is an allegation against a man, investigate the fuck out of that, okay? So that is really what the Me Too movement's demand was, and it was an absolutely justified demand. And instead, what happened throughout Me Too and what's happening now is that the woman who was doing the allegation is being investigated rather than the man who's being alleged, right? So when things got too heated, like in the case of Harvey Weinstein, they had to back down and actually investigate the man because too many people came forward. But in most cases of Me Too allegation, it's always the woman who is investigated and not the man against whom the allegation is being called. So personally, I am not going to vote for Joe Biden. However, I completely understand those people who might feel that they need to vote for Joe Biden, but I don't think that this. And to be honest, I'm not just voting for Joe. I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden simply because there is a Me Too allegation against him. I absolutely, as a socialist feminist, that is a sort of red line for me. But there are other red lines that Joe Biden has crossed. One is segregation. Hello. Okay. Race and segregation. Hello. Second, drone bombing of various people from my part of the world, and so on. So I'm not going to vote for Trump light. If I'm going to vote, I'm going to vote for a social order that actually centers my needs and the needs of my sisters and brothers. Okay, so this is not my candidate, and I cannot vote for him.
I think you perfectly summed up at least how I feel about Joe Biden. Naveen,
yeah, so Tithi, I know it's 8:30. We want to be respectful of your time, so we'll let you go. But if you have any parting thoughts, feel free to speak, and then we'll turn it over to our sponsors to make some announcements.
Well, I'm very, very sorry that I can't stay for long, and I want to just take 2 minutes to say thank you for this. And I'm just amazed at all the comments there and all the resources that people have posted there. And I want to go through all of that. And I just want to end by saying, I hope you are keeping safe and healthy and keeping your loved ones safe and healthy through this pandemic. And I'm looking forward to the time when we meet back up on the streets again. Thank you.
We look forward to that as well. Thank you so much for joining us. So folks want to stay on, we'll let Tithi go. So this event was co-sponsored by several organizations. A lot of them have sent representatives here to have a quick announcements on some of the wonderful work that they're doing. I know Luciana is strapped for time. I'm going to unmute you right now so you can speak. So first up is
Also-
Nasty Women Connecticut, and Luciana McClure will represent them.
You can also turn on her video
Yep.
if you'd like.
Say, let me try. Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, I think the host has to allow my video.
Yeah, if you could do that, Naveen, that'd be amazing.
Okay.
Sorry, I need to do what?
The host needs to enable my video. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Can people see me? Hi.
Yeah, and we can hear you too. Yeah.
I am Luciana McClure with Nasty Women Connecticut. I've been doing, I don't know if many of you are familiar with the work we're doing. I've been doing, it's art exhibitions and collaboration with other community organizations, arts organizations, activist groups in order to elevate their voices by utilizing the arts as a tool for social change and community building. And throughout this work, we also try to develop a lot of community conversations because we find dialogue is an important tool for understanding one another, or at least understanding particularly where we can fall short in our own work. I am very happy to have been invited to be here tonight and to listen to this conversation. And I was familiar with the book, and it was great to be able to revisit and listen to the questions asked in the dialogue. So I just want to thank you for everyone and for allowing me to be here tonight.
Thank you, Luciana, and the Nasty Women Connecticut Collective. We appreciate your endorsement, and we look forward to working with you all going forward as well.
Thank you.
Next up is the International Women's Strike Connecticut. Megan Fountain will represent them. Megan, I'm going to mute you now. Let me know if you want me to start your video as well. Oh, you have your video. Cool. Go ahead.
Oh, do you want to try starting my video? Okay, sorry. Hi, so yeah, I just wanted to invite everyone tonight to come together and fight for a society that values our lives over their profits. And I want to invite us to continue building feminism for the 99% and building towards a women's strike here in Connecticut. I got involved with International Women's Strike when women toured the United States from Argentina and Spain to talk about the strikes that they were building over there. They toured different cities and college campuses and were so inspiring. That's how I met International Women's Strike Connecticut. For many years, for I think 13 years, I've been organizing with undocumented immigrants in Connecticut, fighting for workers' rights, fighting with workers who are earning even less than the minimum wage, oftentimes. When the COVID crisis began, I connected with International Women's Strike again because this was a cross-border movement, and there was a group of feminist organizations and trans and queer organizations from maybe 30 different countries speaking 10 different languages who are getting together to write a manifesto of border crossing feminists manifesto to get out of the pandemic together and change the system. So basically, International Women's Strike Connecticut wants to organize together with all of you and organize across borders and organize with women who are striking all over Latin America, all over Europe, all over the world. And we want to build towards a strike in Connecticut for March 8th, International Women's Day. So I think that in 2 weeks from today, at 7 o'clock, we're going to email, we're going to have another meeting, which you'll get an email about, and a lot of the groups sponsoring the conversation tonight will come together. And then I also wanted to invite everyone to join with the immigrant caravans that are happening, because I'm also part of that as, you know, as an organizer with Unidad Latina en Acción, ULA, and with International Women's Strike Connecticut. Tomorrow, there's going to be another caravan of cars circling the state capitol in Connecticut, demanding that Governor Ned Lamont create a disaster relief fund for undocumented workers and families who have been excluded from federal COVID relief. And so that rally is happening tomorrow. There are women here tonight who are undocumented immigrant women who will be speaking at that rally tomorrow. I'm sorry they can't speak with you tonight about their struggles, but they will be speaking at that rally tomorrow. And you can find it, you can watch it on the Facebook page of ULA New Haven. And you can also join in the caravan and the press conference tomorrow at 3 o'clock at the state capitol in Hartford. And I hope to keep building with you towards a women's strike, cis and trans women, straight and queer women, people who do care work, people who do the work that supports and sustains life. And I hope that we can keep building together. So we will let you know. We'll have a meeting in 2 weeks' time, same time, same place. And I look forward to building with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, so we will send out an email after this with all the different events that are coming up with our sponsors, so people can be clued in and to the different events that are happening. Next up is the Connecticut Workers' Response Committee. I believe Margaret Wilczek is going to speak on this. Let me unmute you. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Margaret Wilczek. I'm a Bridgeport Public Schools art teacher and a member of Connecticut Workers Crisis Response. We are a group of workers, union, non-union, unemployed, and social justice groups who have come together under the pandemic to highlight worker struggles and to put forward a set of demands that address the needs of working people. We have endorsed this event because women are under heightened attack during the pandemic in every aspect of our lives. We need to stand together to stop the attacks. I want to invite everyone to come out to the rally at Lawrence and Memorial Hospital in New London this Saturday, May 30th at 10:30 a.m. Workers there will be holding a rally for a beloved coworker who has died from COVID and for more PPE, which they need. Connecticut Workers Crisis Response meets every Wednesday evening on Zoom, and you can find us on Facebook at Connecticut Workers Crisis Response. Please get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Next up is comrades in the Socialist Resurgence, Stella. Let me unmute you.
Look, another person.
Hi, everyone. Okay. SR is proud to have helped bring folks to hear Tithi Bhattacharya and to have furthered engagement with dialogue surrounding socialist feminism. And we look forward to other collaborations of this nature. We also want to thank the organizing efforts of IWS CT, Sunrise New Haven, Nasty Woman's CT, and the various DSA chapters of Connecticut and Massachusetts, and Dr. Bhattacharya for this enlightening presentation. For those of you who do not know us, Socialist Resurgence is a revolutionary socialist group whose work is steeped in social reproduction theory. We work with the understanding that there can be no true woman's liberation without an eco-socialist revolution, but we understand that revolution is no guarantee. Thus, we support the building of autonomous women's organizations that can educate and mobilize both today and tomorrow, and support the new global cross-border feminist organizing network, Feministas Transfronterizas. In the coming weeks and months, we will be launching a socialist election campaign in Connecticut, carrying out virtual classes on the basics of Marxism, helping to build a June 5th climate action, and helping to build a resistance to the corporate reopening that is sacrificing lives for profits. We are also looking forward to building the June 10th meeting for all women and LGBTQI plus people who want to plan an International Women's Day event as part of the next Global Feminist Dates of Action, which also happens to be on a Wednesday evening. So we hope to see some of you there as well. Please visit our website, socialistresurgence.org, to find out about future activities.
Thank you, Stella. Next up is the Sunrise Movement, I believe. Lena, I will unmute you. Oh, I don't see it, Lena.
I believe it's Human, I believe. Let me scan. We have a lot of participants still, so it's good.
Catalina?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, you've been unmuted. Go ahead, Catalina.
Hi, guys.
My apologies.
No, you're good. I'm Catalina, but I go by Lena. I am part of the Sunrise New Haven Hub, which is part of the National Movement Sunrise. And so we know that the climate crisis is not only an environmental problem, it is also a social problem. It intertwines with systems of oppression such as racism, classism, heterosexism, and sexism, and many, many more. Our solution must address the injustices these people are experiencing and try our best to end them. This is where the Green New Deal comes in. The Green New Deal is a 10-year resolution introduced by the US Congress to mobilize every aspect of American society for 100% clean and renewable energy by 2030, a guaranteed living wage job for anyone who needs it, and a just transition for both workers and frontline communities. Women are included in this. There is a history of leaving women as well as other identities out in certain aspects of society because they are inferior to men. But the Green New Deal will not leave anyone out. It recognizes that everyone is human, no matter their identity, and we all deserve to live a healthy and safe life. Sunrise Movement is a youth-led movement fighting for the Green New Deal, but we partner with other social movements because we know the climate crisis is also a social issue. We could use the help from as many people as possible. We have a Sunrise School if you're interested in learning about different aspects of the climate crisis. We also hold hub meetings throughout the week, I'll have to get back to you on the next one, but if you're interested in helping us or working with us, you can email me at homanclimatechange@gmail.com, and you can also check us out on Instagram or Facebook if you look up Sunrise New Haven. And that's all. So I hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and we will include that information in the post-meeting notes that we'll send out to all the participants. Last but not least is the Democratic Socialists of America. We decided to have one speaker for all the different sister organizations co-sponsoring this. We're very happy to collaborate with the Western Connecticut DSA, Corner DSA, and the Pioneer Valley DSA. And hopefully this will be one of many things that we'll all be working together along with our allies in Connecticut and Massachusetts. Victoria will represent the DSA.
Hello, everyone. I'm Victoria. I'm a member of the steering committee of the Central Connecticut DSA. We're a progressive movement working towards bettering the lives of the working people and taking power from corporations. Currently, we're working on the cancel rent movement. If you'd like to help us improve the lives of working people, especially working women, please join us. We have a General Assembly on May 31st at 3 p.m. Check out our Facebook on how to join that RSVP. Thank you so much for spending time with us tonight, and I hope to see you at another one of our events.